Okay, let's take a look at All Is Lost, Save Honor. The first thing to get out of the way, and I'm sure I said this in the intro, is, a game walks into a space like this that nobody's really covered in any significant way, and does sort of a credible and detailed job, and it wins. Look, as long as it's fairly good, and this is, it immediately sort of rises to a, wow, this is the best thing of this kind that I've ever seen. There are almost no good detailed operational games on this era. Now, okay, let me step back a little bit. A little later, well, significantly later, 100 years later, we're going to see, and I haven't gotten to it yet, but remember what it is, Won by the Sword, which once GMT actually gets their little package to make the game work, it was badly flawed in a number of ways. The rules are getting reprinted and everything, and if they ever get around to actually putting that out and getting me that little care package along with everyone else who ordered it, and that's what they said they were going to do, we'll see that. But that's a later period. Either way though, it's a period, that whole pre-Napoleonic period, there aren't a lot of operational games in it. Now, we saw the Lace Wars stuff, that's probably close to this in terms of, how the armies maneuver and what they do, what kind of role they serve in the field. But there are some significant differences because warfare changed quite a bit in those couple hundred years. But the strategic side or the operational side a little bit less. The operational especially, where we're actually looking at the operational details in a campaign. Also, little known topic, or a little covered topic at least. My hands are so dirty, I'm going to make a mess out of the rules. Europa Simulations does components really, really well. They pay a lot of attention to them. Right down to the first thing you see, this little folio type thing. This may be my favorite means of delivering a moderately small game like this. Like most, really. Most games come in these big boxes filled with air. Sure, there's room if you want to put a counter tray in there and keep it sorted all the time. But my shelves are filling up, and what I certainly don't need is a big Ameritrash crate. So I actually am very fond of this size box, if you want to call it box, folder to hold everything. Everything goes in it, it stores. I can put it on a shelf, and it looks nicer. Although unfortunately it doesn't have the name on the binder. That would make me, on the binding, that would make me a lot happier. I think their other one does, but I'm not positive. But yeah, I can put it on the shelf and it looks pretty, and if it had the name on the binding, and maybe I'll put a little sticky on there or something, although that would kind of spoil the appearance, then it would, have this sort of almost like a nice picture book or something that belongs on the shelf, in a way that my regular magazine games that I keep in a big filing cabinet don't work. Okay, what about the components? Counter's beautiful, a little small, but if you're used to games of this complexity, you won't have too much trouble with it. If you're used to, I don't know, the Battles of the American Revolution or whatever, with their kind of bigger counters for us older-eyed people, well, it's a little easier to cope with those. But this allows the map to be a little smaller, and the map is very, very heavy-duty paper. Now, I have mixed feelings on heavy-duty paper, but after I kind of had this laid out under some weight, it held up just fine. The map actually is very interesting in terms of the terrain, because someone pointed one thing out, which is this huge swamp here, which really kind of restricts things, and then the road networks all centering on Milan. That really creates some of the dynamism and some of the interest of this particular area and why Milan is so central to the battlefield. The the little commander cards are fairly flimsy. They're just a fairly light stock, and you have to rip them out yourself. They're perforated, but reminds me of the old SPI cards, and Avalon Hill also did some kind of like this, but where you have a sheet of cards and you have to kind of pop them out carefully. That's fine because you don't have to shuffle them or anything. They're not going to see a lot of play. Player aids. One of them is a couple of them. They're in kind of a glossier material. This one's probably the least useful of all, but it helps you see the letters on the map a little easier. Maybe somebody was having real trouble seeing the letters after the map was printed and they decided to throw that in. Battle summary here. This is really, really very important actually, because you don't know what to set up where based on just what they call them. There's no easy way on the counters to tell what it is. So you need this reference to tell you what every kind of unit is. There may have been other solutions. I had to print this sucker out. It's on the back of the rules, but I have to reference a sequence of play more often, and I found that, so back of the rules is fine with some rule books. This one's hefty. There's a lot of stuff to look up in it. You know, I mean, it's actually a 50-page rule book. It would almost be nicer. I understand why GMT does the rule book, playbook separation, because I found myself constantly paging back and forth between the scenario special rules that I was on and the internal of the rules. We'll get more to the rule book in a bit. This is your battle board. Turn track. And then these guys are a really heavy duty. Now I found myself paging through these quite a bit. You have a lot of charts in the game and you do have to flip through them. For a game that has very little going on in it in terms of, you know, big battles on the field or anything like that, there's a lot of chart information on it that you have to kind of be aware of and work through. And I actually found these, for whatever reason, they're very heavy stock, they have a nice texture to them or whatever, but I found them hard to page through. Not sure why. Okay, the rule book itself. I've mentioned this before. The rule book is too verbose for my taste, and it tends to also not be repetitive. Now, being repetitive is to some extent an annoyance, but to some extent it's good for drawing information in or for finding things. I can go either way with that, but if you make a rule book very, very verbose and there isn't a lot of repetition and there's a decent amount of indexing, but not for everything that you really might want to find. Like you go to a specific location looking for something, it's not there, and then you don't know where to look. There is a table of contents, misnomered index, in the back of the thing, and I found that was about 50-50 of finding me what I wanted. Not as helpful as a full index, but there's a lot of the information is on here, so you can at least find what you remember as the most likely place for it, but then again, if it's not referenced inside, that's going to be tough. What about the rules themselves, the actual play of the game? Well, let me look at the sequence of play, and I'll try to remember things from there. All right. Weather, just a standard die roll. Effects, weren't too exciting. So the heart of the game is the command system, which the designer does indicate is somewhat based on Kevin Zucker's Napoleonic stuff. It goes quite a bit further, though. Instead of simply, hey, you need action points to move your units, you need action points to give orders to your units. So the initiative roll is not on the can I move or not, but it's on can I take orders. And unlike the Zucker designs that I'm used to, the initiative roll, the older ones primarily, I haven't looked at his new ones in any detail at all. I haven't played any of them most specifically. I've read the rules. The initiative roll comes with a cost. If you fail the initiative roll, you essentially failing the initiative roll is making a discipline check against your units. And if you fail the discipline check, you don't get the order, and your units are demoralized, and you really have to fall back and recover your army. You're trying to push them too hard. That's because these action points aren't just orders and command and control, but they also indicate the money that you pay the troops. And that works in a couple of ways throughout it, which is very suitable for the time and the era. You have this commander concept of capitanos, but you also have the capitano general. And the capitano general is kind of weird because he's the only guy who can have subordinates. You might have more than one capitano general, but in that sense, it feels a little different from what most of the Zucker designs have. Here, a commander can only command as many units as he has unless he's the capitano general. So you can't combine forces except under the capitano general. And that's kind of a weird situation. Plus, the capitano general has his own special, hey, I pay more, I'm a major force. No matter whether I have subordinates or not, I pay more to move because I have the royal, train of hangers-on and everything with me, and all that. So it actually kind of makes sense maybe to park your capitano general and try to use the subordinate forces for more activity, and then they can run back and maybe rearrange their forces. But it's cheaper to use your smaller forces. However, if you're facing the other capitano general, you kind of want to gather your forces so that you can fight him with your full army. Something a little weird about that. The activation phase is also a little different from the Zucker designs. It's not an I go, you go. It's a pulsed system where you roll for initiative on a per leader basis. Each leader has his own initiative rating, and it's modified by the orders he has. And so there's a little bit of gamesmanship in terms of how you're going to allocate, which guy you're going to roll for next. You have two things in mind. Do you want to move this guy next? Is it really important to get where you're going before your opponent gets there? Or do you want to run out your opponent's dudes so that you're free to move wherever you like without him responding? But perhaps even more importantly, you get all your movement points. Because when you roll on the initiative dice, you end up not necessarily getting as many movement points as you would expect. But if you wait out the other guy's turn, you get them all. On the disadvantage side of that, if you wait out the other guy's turn, you can't force march anymore. If he starts passing, you can only move each of your units once. If he's not passing, if you're rolling for initiative, you can press your troops a little harder. That comes at an attrition cost, though. So it's kind of risky, but if you really got to get somewhere and you have a small force, it's well worth it. The combat itself, the core combat, which is skirmishes and maybe siege assaults, is fairly simple. You basically just roll on this assault table. You roll once, and you get some results off of it. You might have to make some discipline checks over here, which is going to be based on the troop quality, la la la. You might get a pursuit. It's about the level of, say, a Europa Universalis type combat system, maybe even a little lighter. The main battle system, though, the major battle system, uses this sucker. You're out on a battle board, you split your forces up, you have different commands in the battle, orders that you can use, you get a semi-random number of these, some of them are affected by terrain, etc. And they have different effects. They're not really all that secret. It's not like it's not like playing Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, where your whole battle situation is decided by some random set. No, you get to select what you think you're going to use, you get to put them where you want, they're kind of hidden, but you probably reveal them pretty quickly, so it's not that big a deal. And then the goal is really to break the enemy's main body of their battle. I'm not sure of a good reason to put units in the rear guard. The vanguard I see some advantages to that, there's no question, because you get to attack first. If you overwhelm the opponent, or if you're the only one in a vanguard, you get to hit his main body before he can really do anything. Of course, you might be able to do that just by chits in your own main body. If you have artillery and he doesn't, you'll be able to fire before him. So the actual main combat, we haven't seen one in a while in my scenario. It does kind of work out into this just sort of, hey, we pair up against each other and we fight for a while and we can't really disengage because these units didn't have a lot of mobility. They weren't standing at 100 meters firing at each other where they could just throw some skirmishers out and pull back. Largely they were engaging with pikes or other melee weapons, although you have some firearms in here, because this is right at the beginning of the modern era. Okay. So, let me see if there's anything else before I start getting into special cases. And then you have kind of an attrition check. Attrition's a little weird. It only gets triggered in certain conditions, and it feels like there's some conditions where it should get triggered, like you're out of the city in bad weather at all. You should have to make a roll, but you do not. It's a penalty if you do have to make a roll, but in general you can march through the rain or snow or whatever, and you're okay with it. Unless you're in hostile territory. If you're in hostile territory, it becomes problematic and you have to roll all the time. So if you're invading the opponent, you always are going to be rolling attrition. Okay. What about things that kind of are weird here? So the first thing that I really noticed with this that I did not like was there's this situation where you get your command points on every yellow turn. And you also have to wipe all your orders off the board at that point. And if you happen to wipe off an attack order, remember you have to pay for all of these. If you wipe off an attack order at that point, you end up not being able to attack. You have a penalty against you. You're not allowed to attack without forcing the order. If you don't want to pay points, you can force an order, and you do that by making a quality check against your troops. Actually, it's a discipline check against their temperament, how willing they are to do what you ask them. Now, you don't want to do that if you can help it in general. If you really, really need them to move and you don't have the points, that's fine. But in this case, it doesn't matter whether you have the points or not. You have to push them if you want them to continue their attack, if you want them to keep pushing the enemy. And that's historically reasonable. The armies did not stay on the move and attack all the time, although I do have some questions as to how it applies to sieges, because essentially what it means is for 4 weeks or whatever, they're not quite a week each, but for 4 turns in a row, you can't attack, you can't bombard in your siege. I don't mind if you can't launch an assault, but I am kind of bothered that you can't continue a bombardment under those circumstances unless you make the roll. And that seems a little weird. And if you got a breach, it would seem to me that you would be able to assault actually under those circumstances. It's just the nature of the siege at the time. I'm not sure what the thinking is there. But either way, it gives these turns an added level of importance that they shouldn't have. And in particular, it means that if you're on your 6th turn, if you're on the turn just before a yellow turn, not the 6th turn of the month, turn just before the yellow turn, and you get rid of the attack then, your attack order then, by the rules, you can start an attack on the first turn, on the immediately following turn. Whereas if you got rid of it here, you wouldn't be able to start an attack until you got down here. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I added a little turn counting mechanism to that, and I think I would add a turn counting mechanism to what? To how long before you have to discard your attack order as well. But that starts the more you try to get away from these yellow turns, the more you start realizing you're going to have to redesign that whole system. So just getting rid of the one thing worked, but I don't know if getting rid of more of it would work. And there's something very problematic with the system as written. I didn't mind the fix that I did, but I think if I took it further, it might start causing more problems. The other issue that I have has to do with a large force, a Capitano General, marching up and hitting a small force. When this happens, the large force gets some random portion or selected portion of it to hit the smaller force. That means there's no advantage to bringing a preponderance of force against a smaller, a non-Capitano General's force. That bothers me. It seems to me that yes, in some sort of meeting engagement or something, it would very likely be the case that you would only have part of the major force hitting the entirety of the smaller force. But it also seems like over time, in the course of a battle, there'd be a possibility of bringing reinforcements in. It seems like if you were static in a location next to each other on the two hexes, you would be in a situation where the larger force would be able to bring everything to bear fairly soon. These things are not accounted for there, and this one really troubles me. It seems like I can't think of a good answer for it. I can think of some little fixes, again, like the other thing. Anyway, in the whole, I find this a very intriguing game. I don't find it to be without flaws. My feeling is that it needs some additional development work, that it wasn't really ready when it was published. And this, I think, is the second edition, by the way. That's a shame. The other game that I've looked at by ES so far, Guelphs and Ghibellines, was quite good, but I seem to remember that I had some desire to make modifications on that as well. So, if the period interests you, and it should interest everyone, this is the beginning of your gunpowder age and your modern warfare in one of the key battlegrounds in Europe of the time, in the key battlefield at the time, actually, then, I think it's worth picking up and trying to fiddle with. There's something very intriguing about the flow of the game. This isn't, first of all, it's certainly not a World War II type situation or World War I where you're stretched across the map trying to gain territory on all areas. It doesn't have any of that feel. You've got loose forces kind of operating in separation from each other, worrying about individual strong points of cities and how to cut their overall supply. It's even, the units are slower moving and harder to get into contact, etc., from what you might be used to if you're used to some of the Zucker games. You don't have the continuous attack functionality. It's really hard to get things done in this. That can be frustrating as hell, and I still don't grasp sort of the what should my strategy be in this, but I've played enough of it to get a feel for what I'd want to do. There's also, though, some kind of annoying little gamey aspects of it, and some of them, like the dropping your attack orders at the end of just before an interface, some of them are really troublesome. Some of them are kind of cool, like the initiative system, being able to play out the other guy's turns by eating them up with your die rolls. It feels neat to do. It doesn't feel like there's anything terribly ahistorical about it. Overall, though, I feel like this is a really huge step in the right direction, but it's just not quite nailed down enough, and I'm not sure, how much more effort it would be, as a player, for you to make something that is going to feel correct to you. and kind of give you that historical model that you probably desire if you're looking at a game like this. All right, let's send it up. I'll be doing another ES game, actually a review copy, I think next.